What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Hands Athletics Radio. Going to record this one as well for the Facebook and the YouTube. So today we are going to talk about, as we transition into the summer training, summer opportunities for athletes. We're going to talk about conditioning tests, training protocols, how to kind of approach one for your team, and kind of cover where you might be going wrong. So first off, we want to talk about the SAID principle for the coaches out there listening, the parents out there listening that are in charge of this. And that principle, the SAID principle, if you don't know what it stands for, it's specific adaptation to imposed demand. So what that means is, as you're assessing, creating a conditioning test, creating a protocol for your athletes during the summer, it's important to look at the demands that are going to be placed upon them in the sport they're playing. So this is going to do a couple of things. It's going to potentially change the way you approach how you train them, but also there may be different tests or different needs for the players based on position. Okay, so if you're doing a sport, track and field is not as common, but if you are, let's say, conditioning test for a football team, even a soccer team, based on a midfielder's responsibilities and demands and durations versus a defensive man or a forward. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into the testing. And commonly what we see is, it seems that people are just choosing things out that they've heard of or that they did back in the day, even though it doesn't necessarily make the most sense. So what I challenge you guys to do is, if you're a strength conditioning coach or if you're a sport coach that has this as your duty, you're going to look at the sport that you're making this for, and you're going to reverse engineer your training and testing based on the actual needs of the athletes. Okay. Not something you've done before, is not something you found on the internet or something that sounds hard. Make sure that there's a logical route that you follow to get to the program or the tests that you've put together. Okay. And then bear in mind that you have your pre-season conditioning, and then there needs to be a very aware and abrupt change in volume and intensity as you get into the season. So what you're doing in the summer and the off season right now isn't necessarily, well, for sure is not what you should be doing in season, because your athletes are already running and getting a ton of volume, actually competing in the sport. Now, where this gets tricky, before we dive too much into it, is nowadays there's a lot of athletes playing multiple sports. Not only that, but they might be playing a sport year round because they have club, and then they have high school season, and then they go back to club. We have multiple athletes in that situation for one sport. And then they also play other sports on top of that. So it's a lot to ask, but these coaches, you high school coaches, you strength conditioning coaches, you have to take into account, what is the athlete doing when they're not with me? Okay. What are they already doing? What other sports are they playing? What kind of conditioning, what kind of running, what kind of movement is that requiring of them? And are you just adding to that heap with a conditioning test that doesn't make sense? That's going to potentially lower performance and also result in overuse injuries. Okay. So you have to be aware. It's not easy. That's why we're saying this takes a professional in most cases, and it's not really fair to throw this on a high school sport coach, in terms of there needs to be literally a conversation and an understanding of what each athlete is doing beyond what you have for them, so that you can rightfully make the decisions on what their training should look like, and what their protocol should look like, and what their testing should look like. Okay. A quick one to dive into, for example, and we see this a lot. We've seen this with a lot of different teams. They're doing mile tests and 2 mile tests. So the problem with the 2 mile test in my opinion, is it's not really replicable of what they're going to do in the sport of soccer, for example. There's going to be starts and stops, jogs and sprints, and recovery periods between each one of those runs. It's not going to be a consistent, same pace 2-mile jog. Okay, so that first off doesn't fall into the line of the SAID principle that we were talking about. This isn't going to be ultimately applicable to what kind of condition these athletes need to be in. And just because they can run a 2-mile run, odds are they're not going to be in shape to play soccer. While there is something to be said about training for something and testing on it, right? We just believe that there's a lot more benefit to training in a way that is going to be applicable to what they do on the field in a similar demand. And jogging 2 miles, running 2 miles doesn't really fall into that category. And a good proof point behind that is, for example, we have some athletes that are on a club team that just won the club state championship. So that's where they play against all the best clubs, not high schools, clubs around the state. And then there is a clear winner on that. And also they just played in a tournament in Las Vegas against people around the whole entire United States. And they took second in that. So odds are they've been playing the entire year. And they're probably in pretty good shape for soccer if they're winning tournaments of this caliber, right? And right now, with the summer demands of what the high school coaches are asking them to do, they're actually not able, or they have to train specifically for this test, this 2-mile test, because odds are they may not hit it in. They probably will, but they're nervous that they're not going to hit that 2-mile test in the time that's allotted. So logically, it doesn't make sense that you're taking players that have been playing all year round, are winning, are in obviously great shape for the sport they're playing, and making them change their training to pass a test for their sport that they can't pass unless they train specifically for it. They're not 2-mile runners. Okay. They're not a track and field athlete that's running a 2-miler, and that's their ultimate performance, right? So their performance is on the soccer field. So if you're athletes that have been playing all year round, they're obviously in shape for soccer, have to change their training or add extra in to pass a test. That test is not applicable to what you're doing at all, and really just adds to the mileage they're getting because they're still practicing, they're playing club, and they're getting ready for high school. So point made there in terms of let's make sure that the testing that we put in front of them is applicable to their sport, because if you can't logically reverse it back to what they do on the field, then it doesn't make sense. Now, somebody will say, well, they jog around on the field. Go watch a soccer game. Okay. It's not a continual pace jog. That's all I'm going to say. Go watch a soccer game, pay attention to the movement they're doing, pay attention to the spans of time that they're working and resting. And it becomes very apparent that it's not applicable to do a 2-mile or even really a 1-mile test run. Okay. It's just an easy thing to put out there. Number 2, you need to look at the level of your athletes. So there's going to be a wide array in high school sports of athletes. You're going to have people, like I said, they've been playing all year round on a club, and you're going to have people that are just showing up to play. They might even just play that one sport. They haven't done anything all year, and now they're just showing up to start the soccer season and the summer training. Okay. So as much as we hate to split athletes up in society today, that needs to happen, because you have athletes that are highly conditioned and highly trained, and you have athletes that are not. So pairing them together is going to be a disservice for both groups. You're going to disservice the ones that haven't been, because they're probably going to be overtrained, They're not going to be able to keep up. They're going to feel unmotivated at that point, and likely run into some injuries because they're deconditioned. And your athletes that are conditioned are going to be held back because the group is not able to complete the things that potentially they could if they had a more advanced or separate grouping. Okay. And number 3 is going to be that doing more. So running more, running them, doing miles, putting miles in, testing for that. Odds are that let's say 80% of the athletes you have fairly poor running mechanics. So spending the time rather, instead of doing a mile run or running and conditioning them, taking the time to work on running mechanics, teaching them how to run, slowly progressing them up. That's going to be more beneficial than getting them in shape. Okay. So teaching them these skills, speed and running as a skill, is much more important than getting them in shape, because all you're going to do is take these athletes with poor movement and add volume on top of that. And most coaches understand that by taking someone with poor movement and not great movement patterns and adding more leads to injury. Okay, you're going to get overuse injuries. You're going to have injuries that can end seasons. You're going to get shin splints. You're going to get all kinds of different nagging injuries, knee pain, hip pain, back pain, because you're loading a poor movement over and over and over again, rather than teaching and learning how to do these movements in a better way. And as crazy as it sounds, most people are very, very, very poor runners, very poor, and then get away with it for a while. But when you're adding all that volume, at some point it's going to break. Even if it's not while they're under your care, down the road, get to college, whatever. We don't want to end up with broken people. So poor movement, more volume is not the answer. The answer is improving movement. Like, I would rather see a team go into a season understanding how to run well and has had a lot of coaching on that side of the realm, and they're a little bit out of shape, than a team that's really in shape and is just set to burn out by the middle of the season with a bunch of injuries. And then lastly, let's talk about a couple concepts. First being the idea of peaking your team and the timing of what you're doing. Again, take into account, you need to be aware that some of these people have been playing all year long. So testing them the same as what you're testing your new people doesn't make sense as well. But let's talk about peaking, timing. Oftentimes I see people or coaches talking about that they want their team in shape for the sport. So sport shape by game 1. So I've played the sports for a very, very long time. I've coached a lot of athletes. And what I'll tell you is, no matter how much running you do, no matter what kind of training we do in here, there's always going to be a different stimulus when they get on the field. Okay. So having that open loop, having the adrenaline, having the competition, it's going to a whole different experience. So you can't simulate that really in the gym. So, or really even in practice, it's going to be to a degree you can. Like, if you have athletes that will get after it and play as hard as they do against each other that they do other teams, then potentially you can argue that point. But once you get out on the field, it's going to be different, and heart rates are going to be elevated. Again, adrenaline is going to play a factor, and they're never really going to be in sport shape, no matter how good a shape they are that first game. And they don't need to be. That's not the point. The point is that they peak out over the season to where, when it really matters, they're in the best shape they can possibly be in. They've been playing the sport, so they're in good shape to participate in the sport, and they haven't overtrained and have overuse injuries. So you have a healthy team. So if you can come into the end of the season with a healthy team, and that's going to be more important than having the best conditioned team, because that conditioning is naturally going to happen over the season as you play. And then that's going to allow you to spend more time in practice on your skill and technique and game plan and the actual sport, because you're expecting them, as they play in real time and full-time speed, they are going to get in better shape. Okay. And again, think back. A lot of these athletes have been doing this all year round. They've been playing. So those guys are already in great shape for soccer. And we're just using soccer for an example. So it's taking steps backward to train them for something that doesn't actually make sense with the sport. First off, and you're just adding a bunch of volume that they don't need because they're already in shape to play the sport. So again, think about it as your team will not, no matter what you do, be in the shape that you want them to be in the first game. That's not going to happen. They're going to get in shape to play the sport by playing the sport. You're practicing, they are playing games, and then they peak towards the end. You've dropped the volume and intensity of your training throughout. As the season has ramped up, you're dropping your volume and intensity of conditioning in practice. You're not conditioning them to punish them. You're not having them show up without their cleats just to run. That's pointless. Okay. And it's really detrimental to the athletes. And also it's kind of not giving them the opportunity to learn the things that they need to learn in terms of the sport itself. So all those things need to be taken into account when putting together a testing protocol or adding conditioning in during the season, because these things matter and they're often overlooked. And there's just a lack of knowing what to do. But what I would say to you, if you were listening to this and you're a coach, a high school coach, strength and conditioning coach, and you're in charge of somebody during the season, at that point, when they're full ramped up in their sport, they're in the middle of the season, they're going to be getting in shape by playing. So less is more. Picking the stuff that's going to make the biggest difference is important. Your practices should be likely a majority of working on the skill of soccer, the skill of the sport, game time situations, stuff like that. Adding conditioning at that point is just detrimental and just ticking that clock of the mileage and the more risk towards injury. Okay. So be smart about that. If you want to run summer conditioning to get them in shape, again, you're never going to get them in game ready shape by the first day or by the game. They're going to get in game ready shape by playing games. Spend that time in the summer working on the skills, building the team together, reinforcing them, positivity, getting them to build a community together. And then if you want to do testing, so that's fine, but make sure that testing makes sense for the sport they're playing. So, for example, building up over time for like a soccer team, building up over time, if you want to do a general one, towards interval runs. So shorter runs, the duration could be anywhere between, for your training, even if we'll work on both ends of the spectrum, but 20 to 30 yard sprints all the way up to potentially 100-yard sprints. Over time, you give them a longer rest ratio. So you started out, let's say, we're going to run a 5 50-meter sprints, 50-yard sprints, and we were going to rest a 4-to-1 ratio. So whatever time it takes them to run that first run, or whatever time cap you give them, you're going to let them rest 4 times out. Okay. And then throughout the summer, you're going to build that. You're going to take the rest down. And as the rest goes down, you know that their conditioning and ability to recover is getting better, which is going to be important in soccer. So the ability to sprint, make a play, steal the ball, drive the ball, pass it, shoot, whatever. The faster that they can get their heart rate back down and recover between those attempts, the more conditioned they are and the ability they have to make repeatable great efforts on the field. So at least testing in a protocol, testing in that way is going to provide you with better results. Athletes that look better on the field, they're going to be more conditioned to actually play the sport of soccer. And it's a good way to test them. So you can just drop the rest times. You can play with different intervals or different distances. So if we're doing more of a speed development acceleration, then you're going to be shorter sprints, 20 to 40, 50 yards. And you're going to give them unlimited rest because we're going to practice running fast. Okay. We're not going to practice. What really irks me is when people don't give the rest periods. Okay. So cool. You made them do a 40-yard sprint. Maybe the first one was fast, but now they only rested 20 seconds. They're not going to be able to give you 100% effort. And in turn, they're not going to learn how to run or get faster because they're not giving 100% effort because the battery is only so full. So you have to let them recharge as much as possible. A good way to do that, if you really want to dive into it and know when enough is enough, is keep time of their sprints and what they're completing them in. And once they fall off a certain range, so have a predetermined range of, okay, once, let's say your best sprint was 10 seconds. Once you are unable to complete it in 14 seconds, you're done. Okay. So once they've fallen off so much, you know that they're not able to give a full effort, and then you're not really training speed anymore. You're just running them into the ground. Okay. Which maybe there's days for that. If you think that that's what's going to cause mental toughness, it's a little old school and not really what we believe in. But if that's what you want, mental toughness, there might be some days that you could do that. Okay. But then your conditioning days. So the longer runs, 60 to 120 yards, whatever you want to choose out. Those are going to have rest times that slowly diminish over the preseason. So you'll have a goal at the end of you're able to complete, X amount of sprints at Y distance and only rest a 1-to-1 ratio or even less than that. So they're able to complete those sprints the way you want them to, with a limited rest time that makes sense for the sport of soccer. Okay. So that's a way to look at it in an actual direction on how you can make these protocols or do this. And that would be more beneficial than what we see a lot of. And I just want to share this information with you guys so you can make those decisions. What's been cool is we've had a lot of teams offload their strength and conditioning to us for the summer, which is really awesome. I think if you're listening in your area, you have a local professional you trust that can do that, definitely do that. Hire a professional. Okay. But again, be aware that their job, when they show up of day one of the game, don't expect your athletes to be in, like, it's going to be taxing. It's going to be hard. They're not going to be in perfect condition to play the sport because they get that conditioning from playing the sport. And you would probably be peaking way too early if they came into the first game and had no problem with it and were in the best shape of their life, because by the end of the season, they're going to be run down. And odds are you're going to have some injuries creep up. Performance can be down. I've seen it a ton where teams play the best at the beginning of the season. They fall apart at the end. Okay. This is a factor in that. Okay. There's a lot of other things that can play into that, but this is a factor in that. So it's worth talking about if you're really trying to maximize your team, do your job, like really get after your job as a coach. These are some things that you can think about to kind of push you in the right direction. Okay. So if any of you guys have questions, feel free to send them over, connect with us on any platform by the name of Hanson Athletics, and shoot questions over, share this with your friends, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube. I appreciate you guys. Have a great day. Hopefully, again, that gives you some objective feedback on how you can attack this rather than just telling you you're doing it wrong. And Thank you for the continued support. Have a good one, guys.